For decades, America has strutted around the world like the undisputed heavyweight champion, dictating terms, flexing its muscle, and expecting every other nation to fall in line. But then came a thunderbolt from New Delhi. One bold, unapologetic move that didn't just rattle Washington, it humiliated it. This wasn't just defiance, it was a message. A message that the age of bowing to America's shadow is over, and that India is no longer the student in the room. It's the challenger and increasingly the rival. Tonight, we're going to talk about the day the world's oldest democracy was forced to swallow its pride at the hands of the world's largest democracy. For years, the United States has basked in the illusion of absolute supremacy. It strutted across the international stage, issuing diktats, throwing its weight around, and reminding everyone that it was the ultimate power, the final authority. Presidents came and went, but the attitude remained the same. America speaks, the world listens. America demands, the world delivers. And if anyone dared to resist, they were swiftly punished through sanctions, through isolation, or through military might. That's been the script for decades. The problem is history has a habit of changing the script when you least expect it. Because then came India, a nation long dismissed in Washington circles as a developing player, an eager partner, a country still finding its place in the global hierarchy. To the Americans, India was useful, a market, an ally against bigger rivals, a democracy to parade when convenient. But never in their imagination did they expect New Delhi to look them in the eye and say, "No, enough, not this time." And when it happened, the shockwaves weren't just felt in Washington. They reverberated across the entire globe. The truth is, America's foreign policy has always relied on compliance. Compliance from Europe, compliance from Asia, compliance from anyone who benefits from American trade, weapons, or influence. That compliance keeps the machine running. But what happens when one of the world's largest nations, one of the fastest growing economies, one of the oldest civilizations, one of the most formidable rising powers, refuses to comply? What happens when India decides it won't be bullied, it won't be dictated to, and it certainly won't be humiliated? The answer is simple: the tables turn. And that's exactly what unfolded. Suddenly, the United States wasn't the one dictating terms, it was the one scrambling to save face. Suddenly, the almighty lecture machine from Washington found itself tongue-tied. Because India's bold move was more than defiance. It was a declaration of independence on the global stage. It said, "We don't need your approval, we don't seek your validation, and we will not apologize for protecting our own interests." It was a cold, hard reminder to America that the world it once controlled is no longer the same. For decades, the US enjoyed unchallenged dominance after the fall of the Soviet Union. It told countries where to buy oil, which alliances to join, which wars to support, and which leaders to embrace. It was the self-appointed sheriff of the global order. But India's defiance cracked that illusion wide open. It exposed the uncomfortable truth that American dominance is no longer unquestioned. That a nation of 1.4 billion people, with unstoppable economic momentum and strategic weight, can look at Washington and choose its own path. This wasn't about hostility toward America. It was about sovereignty, pride, and the refusal to be treated like a pawn in someone else's chess game. And that is what America didn't see coming. For too long, it assumed India would play by its rules. For too long, it underestimated the political will in New Delhi. And when the moment of truth arrived, Washington suddenly realized it was up against a country that had grown far beyond the role of junior partner. Humiliation is a strong word, but it's the right one, because what America felt in that moment wasn't just defiance, it was exposure. Exposure to the reality that its dominance is eroding. Exposure to the reality that nations it once dismissed are now capable of shaping the world order. Exposure to the reality that its threats, its warnings, its endless stream of moral lectures no longer carry the same weight. And let's be clear, this wasn't just about one decision, one bold move. It was about symbolism. It was about a shift in psychology. When India made its stand, it wasn't just speaking for itself. It was voicing the frustration of dozens of nations that have quietly seethed under American pressure for decades. It was giving form to a new world where choices aren't dictated by Washington or Brussels, but by national interest, by independence, and by dignity. That is the context. A United States that thought it was untouchable, suddenly confronted by a nation it thought it could manage. An America that believed the world would always bend to its will, suddenly staring at a country refusing to bow. And in that refusal lay humiliation, not because India sought to embarrass America, but because America had convinced itself embarrassment was impossible. The irony: the largest democracy on earth had to remind the oldest democracy on earth that sovereignty isn't a slogan, it's a principle. And if America failed to recognize that, then India was more than willing to teach it the lesson. India's decision wasn't wrapped in subtlety, nor was it disguised behind the kind of diplomatic niceties that usually allow great powers to save face. It was bold, deliberate, and executed with a confidence that stunned not just Washington but much of the world. At the heart of it was a refusal to bend under pressure. America expected compliance, expected New Delhi to quietly fall in line as it so often demands from others. Instead, India charted its own course, prioritizing its national interest above all else, even when it clashed directly with American expectations. And make no mistake, this wasn't some impulsive gamble. It was a carefully calculated demonstration of sovereignty. India understood the risks. It understood that saying no to America comes with consequences, political, economic, and diplomatic. Yet it also understood that true power isn't built by constantly seeking approval from others. True power comes from the ability to make your own choices and to stand by them without apology. That is exactly what India did. The move exposed the fragility of America's assumed authority. For decades, the US has thrived on the assumption that no country would dare resist, let alone defy it so publicly. India shattered that assumption in one decisive stroke. By refusing to surrender its independence to American pressure, India made it clear that its alliances, its trade, and its strategic calculations will be determined in New Delhi, not dictated from Washington. What made the move so humiliating for America was not just that India said no, but how unapologetically it said it. No excuses, no concessions, no groveling. Just a clear, defiant stance that sent a message to the entire world: India will not be lectured, it will not be bullied, and it will not compromise its dignity for anyone. Humiliation is a word Washington is not used to hearing. For decades, the United States has played the role of global enforcer, handing out lectures, drawing red lines, and punishing those who stepped out of line. It's been accustomed to respect, to obedience, to a kind of deferential silence whenever it raises its voice. But what unfolded with India was different. For the first time in a long time, America's warnings didn't just fall flat, they were ignored. And in diplomacy, there is nothing more humiliating than being exposed as powerless when you've built your reputation on being untouchable. The sting wasn't just in India's refusal to play along, it was in the ripple effect. The whole world was watching. Allies, rivals, neutral players. Everyone saw a major power tell the United States, calmly and unapologetically, that its pressure no longer worked. That spectacle alone was damaging, because it chipped away at the aura of invincibility that America has long projected. When the self-proclaimed leader of the free world finds itself sidelined, the humiliation writes itself. And here's the crucial point: it wasn't just a symbolic embarrassment, it was a strategic one. America had invested heavily in the idea that India would always lean on its side, that New Delhi would play the junior partner in the great geopolitical drama. Instead, it was reminded, in the bluntest possible way, that India is no one's subordinate. That realization hurt more than the actual decision itself. For America, humiliation lay not only in being defied, but in the recognition that its dominance is slipping, and that its power to dictate terms is no longer absolute. India didn't just refuse. It exposed the myth of unquestioned American control. What makes this moment even more significant is that it wasn't an isolated act of defiance. It was a declaration of where India now stands in the world. For years, New Delhi was seen as a regional player, important but not decisive, influential but not commanding. That image no longer holds. India today is not just rising, it is asserting. It has become the indispensable nation in Asia, a power whose choices ripple far beyond its borders, a voice that cannot be ignored. This boldness comes from strength, an economy surging into the top ranks of the world, a military modernizing at speed, a diplomatic corps that has mastered the art of hard-nosed negotiation, and a population whose scale alone gives it unparalleled leverage. It is no longer the India of cautious hesitation, endlessly worried about how its every step might be perceived abroad. This is a nation unafraid of setting its own agenda and unafraid of rejecting demands that don't align with its interests. What unsettled Washington was not just India's defiance, but the realization that it reflected a deeper transformation. India is no longer positioning itself as a junior partner to anyone. It is shaping its own alliances, building its own networks of influence, and commanding respect not through favors granted by others, but through sheer weight of presence. The move that rattled America was simply the latest evidence of that transformation. It told the world that India is not rising quietly in the shadows. It is stepping into the light, prepared to compete, to lead, and to challenge. And that, more than anything else, explains why the humiliation cut so deeply. Because it proved that America is no longer dealing with a follower. It is dealing with a rival. The bigger message in all of this is brutally simple: the world is no longer unipolar. The days when Washington could click its fingers and expect instant obedience are fading, and India's stand proved it. What happened wasn't just about one decision, one clash of interests, or one diplomatic standoff. It was about a shift in the balance of power. A shift that every country watching immediately understood. If India, once viewed as a dependable partner, could so openly defy America, then what's stopping others from doing the same? That's what made this moment historic. It didn't just bruise American pride. It emboldened nations across the globe. Countries in Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and even Europe are now looking at India and seeing a model. A nation willing to say no without flinching, willing to prioritize sovereignty over approval, willing to remind the so-called superpower that respect must be earned, not demanded. It set a precedent that the American way is not the only way. The symbolism was staggering. On one side, a superpower clinging to its old habits of command and controlled diplomacy. On the other, a rising power calmly asserting that it will chart its own course, regardless of who is displeased. That collision marked more than a diplomatic disagreement. It marked the beginning of a new global reality. The message is clear. India has announced itself as a force that will no longer be managed or patronized, and America, whether it likes it or not, must now adjust to that fact. The humiliation was real, but the lesson was even sharper. The age of unquestioned dominance is over, and a multipolar world is not coming. It has already arrived. So here we are, the self-styled enforcer of the world order, for the first time in decades, forced to taste the bitterness of rejection. And who delivered it? Not Russia, not China, but India. A democracy that stood firm, refused to be cowed, and proved that sovereignty is not up for negotiation. That one bold act didn't just humiliate America, it rewrote the rules of the game. The real humiliation was not in losing an argument, but in being reminded that the world has changed. The American script of dominance no longer runs uncontested, and India, by daring to defy, has shown every nation that there is another way, a way built on courage, independence, and pride. That is why Washington's discomfort is so profound. It wasn't just defied, it was exposed. Exposed as a power clinging to an old order that no longer exists. The bigger truth is this: America must now come to terms with a reality it has long tried to ignore. The age of unchallenged supremacy is gone. India is not a pawn, not a junior partner, not a country waiting for permission. It is a power in its own right, a power willing to say no, willing to stand alone if necessary, and willing to carve out a future on its own terms. And that is the lesson the world will remember. In that single bold move, India didn't just defend its dignity, it announced to the globe that no superpower, no matter how mighty, has the right to dictate its choices. That is why this moment matters. Because it was more than humiliation for America. It was liberation for everyone else.